coming up with climate disasters dealing more damage more frequently.
We had an unusually high tide today. There was a 9.4.
There is consensus to transform global food systems.
They work on, they are farmers with limited resources. Climate change has brought drought, floods.
We look at the role of rural farmers, the challenges in agriculture, and how it all impacts the environment. But do you see the political will by governments needed to reduce the sector's greenhouse gas emissions?
At the moment, not really.
And a small company with a big dream to end global malnutrition.
Malnourished people are eating every day. They're spending real money on food. Just the food products they have access to are really, really, really unhealthy.
Just 2 degrees starts now. A small company with only 9 employees wants to end world hunger by 2030. A mammoth task considering the scale of food insecurity and malnutrition, both of which are exacerbated by the pressure increasing weather disasters place on land and water resources. The World Food Programme says about 128 million people across the world need the organization's assistance for daily sustenance. The company, Tailored Food, is helping by working with small entrepreneurs in countries impacted by malnutrition and by creating healthy, inexpensive food products.
When you talk about the problems in food and in our food system today, food is a really interesting challenge compared to other sectors like healthcare or education, in that most of those people you just mentioned who are being supported by the World Food Programme, most hungry people in our world today are spending real cash on food every day. And with that real cash they're spending in markets and in shops, on the street, purchasing food, they're not able to get the nutritious, culturally relevant, delicious food that they want and need to feed their family and to nourish their bodies. And so at Tailored Food, what we do is we research, develop, and scale up nutritious, low-cost food products that are culturally relevant, that are cool, that are cosmopolitan, that taste really good, but that most importantly, affordably deliver nutrition to people who need it the most.
Can you give a brief example of exactly how that works?
Yeah, so for example, in Liberia, we partnered with a group of farmers who run an operation called Kawada Farm. We researched, developed, and scaled up a line of fermented and flavored cassava-based porridges that are fortified and high in protein.
We produce this product in collaboration with smallholder farmers across Liberia that we support by providing them trainings to grow the mold and disease-resistant cassava that they use to turn into gari, and then we buy the gari and fortify it by adding micronutrients and soy protein. And we take our product and sell it to schools.
Initially, we started production in one room of an abandoned half-built hotel with a couple $100 cash to renovate this one room of this abandoned half-built hotel. And today, 6 years later, Kawada Farm, who we still work with day in and day out, Kawada Farm is the largest provider of nutritious food in Liberia. We supply to national school lunch programs and have been selling consistently super tasty porridges to Liberian families. Another example is Congo, where we took a Congolese food recipe from the 1800s that had never been commercially produced, a product called Mampala Pinda. And we worked with 160 female entrepreneurs to, in a safe, consistent way, produce Mampala Pinda, which is basically a Congolese-style Cliff Bar, protein bar. We produce Mampala Pinda at the village level, produce 70,000 of these Congolese-style protein bars a month. They're packaged in banana leaf rather than plastic, and they sell into local markets as well as directly to the World Food Programme.
And one of the things I like about your model in terms of using local producers is that we just talked about flying food in. This food often comes from very popular global brands, and somehow they seem to make a profit off of, global malnutrition because it's their products being flown into these countries. Do you think there's a concerted effort to continue the status quo of hunger so that big brands continue to benefit?
Yeah, it's a big question, and one I have a lot of thoughts on, and have done a good amount of work around historically, and still this is true with each passing day. There's often this belief, even inside the charitable world, the world of the big nonprofit organizations that we're working with at Tailored Food. There's this kind of weird, very singular idea that a low-income family is one that is, that are farmers, that are growing their own food, and that are not getting enough food, and that's the problem. But when you, even in in rural Rwanda a few months ago, or in any of the markets we work in, families in rural communities are purchasing, spending often most of their income on food, 50 to 73% of their income on food, and most of that money is going to processed and often unhealthy food from the world's biggest companies. You're right. It's quite interesting, but as the world's biggest food companies have lost market share in North America, Europe, certain parts of Asia, as wealthier consumers have kind of moved away from eating ultra processed food and moved more towards eating fresh food and less processed food. These big companies have turned their focus and to Africa, to Latin America, to Central Asia, to Southeast Asia, to regions of the world where low-income consumers are looking to, purchase food that is cosmopolitan, that is exciting, that does come with a social status, but often, unfortunately, it does not come with those nutritional benefits.
Before I let you go, Taylor, my last question is to you. What do you think is the root cause of global malnutrition? And do you think we can end global hunger by the year 2030 if we really wanted to?
Yeah. So I think somewhat to the last question there, the root cause of malnutrition has completely changed in the last 10, 20 years. And this is something no one's talking about in the sector. Again, like for me, being in rural Burundi or Somalia recently, or I'll be in Haiti next month, low-income families are spending real money on food every day. We simply have a broken market. Low-income families are spending cash on food, and that food is causing them to be malnourished. So it's not a problem that people don't have money. It's not a problem that we need to grow more food for X number of people. It's not even a problem of like, oh, so much of the food we grow or produce is wasted, and therefore people don't have enough to eat. It's like, no. Malnourished people are eating every day. They're spending real money on food. Just the food products they have access to are really, really, really unhealthy. And so the question is for those and so then to the second part of your question, it's quite that's a little sad, arguably, but it's actually quite exciting, because it's like, wait a second, malnourished families around the world, they're spending real cash on food every day. So there's no need for charity in this space. What's needed is simply better food products that are culturally relevant, that taste really good, that are aligned with someone's traditional norms around how they cook, and that at the end of the day, provide families who are currently malnourished with the nutrition they need to grow and thrive. So I think, we at Tailored Food are not going to end hunger by 2030 alone. Our thesis is we work on a number of projects independently, where we work with incredible entrepreneurs who are kind of on the front lines of food systems change. But then we also work inside the biggest global corporations and the biggest food systems institutions, organizations like the World Bank, the World Food Program, UNICEF, and others, to try to change how the biggest institutions are thinking about food systems transformation, so we can have a real shot of ending hunger by 2030.
Give us an idea of what Cameroon faces when it comes to environmental degradation and extreme weather.
Cameroon is African miniature, and But currently, due to the extreme weather conditions and climate change, it's been a massive problem for the people of Cameroon, particularly the smallholder farmers. It's been a big problem. They work on, they are farmers with limited resources. Climate change has brought drought, floods, and we have just different challenges that are really affecting these farmers, and it's been a huge problem for so many of them, and not just the farmers, as a country as a whole.
You're fondly referred to as the celebrity farmer. How do you help farmers create their own sustainable businesses while keeping a firm eye on how climate change can impact them?
My primary motto as a celebrity farmer is profitability and sustainability. So I try to tell my clients that it's not just about making money in Africa, because particularly celebrity farmer works with farmers, people in the diaspora. So my whole initiative is trying to bring the diaspora to invest back home, not sending remittances to pay school fees and health expenses in Cameroon, but to be able to invest in the agricultural sector so that we can have more sustainable income. So what I tell them is not just about, they should not think of just profitability, but sustainability. So I try as much as possible to ensure that the projects that we do is environmentally friendly. So we carry out climate smart agriculture. For instance, presently we have a project which I did for a client, agroforestry. So it was a plantain farm. So he asked me to cut down all trees, and then we do the normal agricultural stuff where we have to plant plantains in a straight line, well arranged and all these things. I told him no. If we do this and burn down the bush before planting, doing all these things, we are destroying the soil. So it's more advisable we do agroforestry where we plant the plantain with the forest. We can just cut down some few trees, but we ensure that most of the trees are still up so that we can have these plants there with the trees. And I mean, it's beautiful. Right now, he's harvesting his plantains, and when he goes to the farm, the air he breathes, the way he sees the farm is totally different. So he's making money and also really enjoying the farm, knowing that it's contributing to protecting the climate.
The food systems transformation is critical to the climate crisis and biodiversity loss. That's why at COP28 in Dubai last December, 134 world leaders signed on to the landmark Agriculture, Food and Climate Action Declaration. It's meant to help in strengthening food systems, building resilience to climate change, reducing global emissions and fighting against hunger. It was the first of its kind at a COP gathering. The range of initiatives announced came with pledges of more than $2.5 billion to support the food climate agenda. The UAE Environment Minister said there is no path to keeping 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach that does not urgently address the interactions between food systems, agriculture, and climate. Agriculture carries a double burden. It's not only the sector most vulnerable to climate change, it's also a major cause of it. Firstly, can you talk about our trajectory in 2024? Do you see us radically changing the planet's food systems to help the environment and possibly end world hunger?
Well, I think we do need to radically change the food system, and transformation is much needed, both to achieve better nutritional outcomes. You suggested ending world hunger, but also to achieve better environmental outcomes, both climate change, biodiversity, unsustainable water use. Are just some of the key ones, perhaps. But so we do need to see that transformation. However, I think to expect that to happen in 2024 would be quite optimistic. I suppose we would like to imagine that we're moving in the right direction. There's certainly a lot of discussion, more and more increasing discussion about the need for that transformation. The most recent COP was the first time that food systems and the requirement to change those systems was explicitly addressed, and that's very welcome. But obviously, it was fairly. We didn't go much beyond that, and we do need to see further action, and those actions are are systemic. They go right across the food system, thinking about how foods are produced, what foods we choose to consume, our diets, and international trade and much else.
Peter, quite a bit of what you talked about surrounds animal livestock and land use. But do you see the political will by governments needed to reduce the sector's greenhouse gas emissions, particularly in animal agriculture?
Yeah. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. The livestock sector and animal agriculture is a really important component of the food system, particularly when we think about the environmental externalities from that food system. You know, where livestock dominates those outcomes. So yeah, we do need to, sadly, we need to reduce the amount of on a global basis, the amount of animal sourced foods that we consume. Particularly in the global north, and you know, how do we do that? And your question was, you know, do I see the political will in that context? And the answer is, at the moment, not really. You know, there's some discussion, but I don't think there's anything like enough movement in that regard. You know, we don't really pay, as consumers, you don't really pay the true costs of the foods that we produce, and none more so than meat and other animal sourced foods, where subsidies are often provided, and the sort of the environmental externalities are not priced into those foods. You know, again, greenhouse gases, biodiversity loss, for example.
In part because of colonialism, according to some analysts, many poor countries still use much of their arable land to grow food for export to wealthier nations, while food for locals is imported. But how do we uproot this system and change things, you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. I mean, many countries actually produce and export while importing for consumption. I mean, even Scotland, for example, to sort of take an example, is the salmon and fish that we eat is almost exclusively imported, and the fish that we produce is almost exclusively exported. So it's not just a colonial kind of legacy. That's, if you like, it's sort of something about market dynamics more broadly, and that might be okay. We just need to think about what the outcomes are for those different populations are involved, and if people are getting at, you know, fair prices and are able to afford healthy diets and sort of healthy livelihoods, then that's fine. However, if that's not the case, and there's sort of some element of inequality and unfairness within those structures, then there clearly are issues there.
Before I let you go, Peter, let's go back to the topic of ending world hunger. Earlier in this episode, I spoke with an organization that works with local farmers and communities in countries like Liberia and Cameroon. They theorize that people who are malnourished don't necessarily have a problem purchasing food, but instead just don't have access to healthy food, preventing them from getting sick and malnourished. What are your thoughts on that theory?
Yeah, I mean, we've focused largely on producing calories. We haven't necessarily, as a sort of global food system, not necessarily on production of healthy, nutritious food. And that's kind of almost been exacerbated by kind of processing of foods and sort of ultra processed foods, which kind of produce empty calories with even fewer sort of nutritional content. And in many parts of the world, you know, it's seen as sort of almost better to eat processed foods than fresh foods, even though the opposite is of course the case. And if we look at things like studies like the Global Burden of Disease study, you can see that you know, the health outcomes are very strongly, you know, too little fresh fruit and veg, too little consumption of whole grains, are you know, some of the most damaging impacts on human health, and coupled with, you know, too much salt, too much sugar, particularly in sweet and sugared beverages, and trans fats associated with processed foods. So, you know, we do need to go back to a diet that's sort of more minimally or not processed fresh foods, and away from these kind of empty calories in processed foods. So I think that's, you know, that's another very particularly on a health angle, maybe less on an environmental angle. From a health perspective, that sort of transition is really important.
And what we see happening in Gaza is a current example of how conflicts can affect food systems. The World Food Programme says Palestinians in the enclave are facing alarming rates of starvation. Experts link the food crisis to the destruction of Gaza's farmlands, water and sanitation infrastructure.
In the rest of the world, there are around 130,000 people facing catastrophic hunger. But according to the UN, 4 times that amount are suffering in Gaza.
It is a situation where pretty much everybody in Gaza is hungry. About more than 500,000, meaning 500,000 people are starving. And that means that it is like 1 in every 4 people is starving in Gaza as we speak.
The World Food Program says the entire population is experiencing the worst levels of acute food insecurity. Fewer than 200 aid trucks enter Gaza every day, less than half the pre-war level. And a new UN-backed report paints a grim picture, warning that residents are now exposed to outbreaks of disease. Health officials say an epidemic could result in more deaths than those caused by the war itself. There's already been some 350,000 cases of infectious diseases and 100,000 cases of diarrhea since Israel's ground invasion began. To make matters worse, the coastal enclave is on the brink of an environmental catastrophe it may never recover from.
The toxic trail that is left upon generations after the guns fall silent will be there because of debris management, oil installations, sewerage, and so on.
And more than 20% of its agricultural land has been completely decimated. An investigation by Human Rights Watch confirms orchards, greenhouses, and farmland in northern Gaza have been destroyed by Israeli forces, compounding the risk of famine. Satellite imagery shows once lush agricultural land now brown and desolate, after bulldozers carved new roads to clear the way for Israeli armored vehicles. Perennial trees like olives and citrus fruit or field crops like vegetables have been subjected to unprecedented destruction. Israel's missiles also didn't spare the main water pipes that supply Rafah city in southern Gaza.
والحمامات الزراعية مش مخلينا لنا حاجة بضربوها لنا هذا مقاومة لهم لا هي مقاومة ولا هي شيء خضرة هي زراعية سلة غذائية هذا للمواطن بس.
Before October 7th, climate events like rising sea levels, drought, and extreme heat already threatened water supplies and food security in Gaza. Now, much of it has been destroyed, with devastating health and environmental implications for decades to come.
Well, scientists experimenting with regenerative agriculture have been looking into making lupin beans tastier and more lucrative. The legume seems to be offering a more sustainable alternative to soy as a source of plant protein.
Soy farming is often talked about in the same breath as sustainability. It is an excellent source of fiber, and with a high concentration of essential amino acids, it makes up a significant portion of the protein in our global food supply, a generally preferred alternative to animal-based products.
But consumers are starting to look behind that label and ask questions around how is it produced, very chemically intensive systems that uses a lot of water.
Environmental groups like the World Wildlife Fund link soy production with deforestation and other environmentally damaging practices. The group says the conversion of forests, savannas, and grasslands into farmland threatens wildlife and natural ecosystems. For instance, soy expansion has encroached on millions of hectares of habitat in the Amazon rainforest, the northern Great Plains of the United States, and African savannas. But now, food scientists at Australian-based company Wide Open Agriculture say they found an alternative that demands less land and water resources.
Why now is the time for lupin is really the technology has arisen out of a 30-year research project that really identified the ability to unfold the lupin protein and make it more versatile for a whole range of food products.
Lupins are legumes belonging to the pea family with many advantages. Not only do they contain protein levels comparable to soybeans, there are also environmental benefits. The beans enhance soil fertility by enriching it with nitrogen, simultaneously reducing reliance on synthetic fertilizers. They thrive in diverse climates and reduce pressure on agricultural areas and at the same time preserve biodiversity. They're also generally thought to be more drought and frost tolerant than crops like soybean and can therefore be grown in more northern locations and at higher altitudes. Western Australia is home to 3/4 of the world's lupins. Sustainable agriculture company Wide Open Agriculture and the Australian government both believe the demand will rise for lupins.
We know that we're competing with soy, but this is a different market, I think. I think it's that market for people who are looking for that environmentally sustainable product.
And that's how we wrap this episode. Until next time, bye.